The twin suns of Arkala burned like angry gods in the red sky, turning once green lands into endless deserts. For centuries, the Arkan people had lived in peace, building shining cities and great crystal towers that touched the clouds. They were proud, wise, and gentle, known across nearby star systems for their music, art, and science. But now all that beauty was dying. The suns, their life-givers, had turned unstable, releasing powerful solar storms that tore through the atmosphere. Oceans boiled away, forests burned, and cities crumbled under the weight of falling skies. Every day the horizon glowed like fire and the air tasted like ash. The Arkan Council, once a symbol of wisdom, sat helpless in their great hall. They had sent distress calls to every known empire in the galaxy, the Voss, the Dreth, the mighty Core Dominion. They begged for help, offering their knowledge, their resources, even their freedom. But the replies were always the same: cold silence or polite rejection. No one wanted to save a dying world. To them, the Arkan were already lost. Why waste ships, energy, or time on a civilization that could not be saved? In the capital city of Lisan, the last surviving families gathered in underground shelters. The sky above had become too dangerous, filled with radiation storms that melted metal and burned skin. Children cried at night, asking if the stars would ever shine again. Mothers held them close and whispered stories of the old days, of green rivers, singing birds, and glowing gardens that once bloomed under soft light. But even those memories were fading. Every day another region went dark. Among the few who still worked in the communication centers was an Arkan named Rylith. He was young, barely a century old in Arkan years, with silver skin that shimmered faintly under the emergency lights. His job was simple: send out one last message to anyone who would listen. Most of his team had already given up. They said there was no point. But Rylith refused to stop. He typed message after message, his trembling fingers moving over the console as the ground rumbled beneath his feet. Attention. Any listening station, any fleet within range. This is the Arkan people of Arkala. We seek shelter, any form of help. We are dying. Please. The same message repeated across all channels. He watched the monitor flicker. No reply. He sighed, leaning back, feeling the heat seep through the walls. His eyes lifted to the small window where faint streaks of orange light crossed the sky. Debris from destroyed satellites falling back into the burning atmosphere. For days, the same silence answered. But on the fifth day, something changed. A faint signal flashed across the receiver, a strange code not of Arkan origin. Rylith's heart raced. He adjusted the frequency, cleaning the static. The signal was weak but clear enough to translate. Message received. Human Alliance Communications. Identify your coordinates. Rylith froze. Humans. The name was familiar only from old records, primitive beings from a death world called Earth. A violent species that had risen too fast, survived too much, and frightened half the galaxy with their unpredictable nature. No Arkan had ever met one in person. The story said they were aggressive, dangerous, and emotional. But right now, none of that mattered. A reply was a reply. He quickly sent their coordinates, explaining the planet's instability, their dwindling population, and the urgent need for evacuation. Hours passed without an answer. Then another signal came. Understood. Hold position. Help incoming. Rylith could barely believe it. He rushed to the council chamber, shouting the words. The elders looked at him with disbelief. Humans, one said. You must be mistaken. They are not rescuers, they are destroyers. Another elder whispered. They will come to conquer, not to save. But Rylith stood firm. Maybe, he said softly. But no one else is coming. Days turned into weeks, and the planet grew worse. Entire continents cracked open, releasing plumes of smoke into the upper sky. The last energy grids flickered and died. When people began to lose hope again, something appeared in the heavens. A shadow unlike any they had seen before. Massive ships, black and silver, descending silently through the red clouds. At first, the Arkan feared it was an invasion. Sirens blared. Civilians ran for shelter. The council tried to send warning messages, but their systems had already failed. Then the first transmission came from orbit, in clear Arkan translation. This is Commander Alyssa Ward of the Human Alliance. We are here to assist evacuation and stabilization efforts. Do not resist. Remain calm. Help is here. Rylith stood outside the bunker, staring up at the glowing streaks cutting across the sky. Dozens of ships, some shaped like hammers, others like wings, began landing in the ruined plains. Human dropships unfolded mechanical limbs and began constructing massive shelters. From orbit, drones released shimmering shields to block radiation. The humans worked with precision and chaos combined. They spoke loudly, argued constantly, and yet every one of them seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Within hours, communication towers were rebuilt. The humans brought power back to parts of the city that had been dark for months. They treated the sick with strange medicines, gave food that restored strength and promised relocation. But still, the Archon watched them with fear. These creatures moved like predators, strong, fast, unafraid of the firestorms raging nearby. Even the way they stared at the burning sky felt different. Where the Archon saw death, the humans saw a challenge. At night, Rylith walked among the ruins, watching the human engineers laugh as they worked under the glow of artificial lights. One of them noticed him, a woman with short hair and tired eyes. "You're Rylith, right? The one who sent the message?" she asked. He nodded. She smiled slightly. "You've got courage." "Most would have given up," Rylith replied. "We had no choice. No one else would listen." She looked up at the red sky. "Well, we heard you. That's what matters." He didn't know what to say. These humans confused him. They didn't act like conquerors. They didn't demand obedience or gratitude. They just worked, tirelessly, fearlessly. And when an Archon asked why they had come so far for strangers, one human simply answered, because someone had to. For the first time in months, the people of Arkala felt something they had forgotten: hope. Children played near the human shelters, touching the strange machines that hummed softly in the air. Elders wept as they saw fresh water being filtered and distributed. Even the council, once proud and doubtful, began to believe that survival might still be possible. Still, no one understood why humans would come. What drove them to help? Rylith asked Commander Ward that question one night as they stood on the observation platform. She watched the broken horizon and said, "We've been where you are. Once our skies burned too. No one helped us. We swore we'd never let that happen to anyone else." Her words stayed with him. He looked at the stars above, wondering what kind of world Earth must be. A place so dangerous that it created people strong enough to fight dying suns. As the days passed, the humans continued their work. More ships arrived, some filled with builders, others with medics, and some that carried weapons not to fight enemies, but to fight nature itself. The Archon watched in awe as humans detonated precision charges to redirect molten rivers away from their last cities. It was reckless, terrifying, and effective. For the first time since the collapse began, the Archon dared to believe they might survive. The humans had come not as conquerors but as guardians, and though their ways were loud and frightening, their hearts burned with something powerful, something the Archon could not name yet, but would soon understand. Rylith looked up once more at the human ships floating against the dying suns. He whispered to himself, "They came when no one else would." And in that single moment, he realized that the story of the Archon people was not ending. It was just beginning, because humanity had answered their call. The first human ships looked like moving mountains, covered in armor and lights that cut through the dark sky. The Archon had never seen anything like them. These ships did not come quietly. They arrived with a thunder that shook the ground. People came out of shelters to watch, unsure whether to cheer or run. But when the first human dropships landed and no weapons were fired, a strange calm filled the air. The Archon expected speeches, perhaps a council meeting, some kind of negotiation. Instead, the humans got straight to work. They did not ask permission. They did not waste time with long greetings. The moment their ships touched the ground, hundreds of humans came out wearing heavy suits carrying machines that looked like glowing insects. They began building large metal domes that expanded like flowers opening in the sun. The Archon had spent years arguing about what to do, but the humans acted in hours. They built air filters to clean the toxic wind. They set up energy generators and connected strange cables that glowed blue in the dust. The Archon could only watch as the once silent plains filled with noise and motion. At first, many Archon were afraid. "Why are they here in such numbers?" one elder whispered. "Are they saving us or claiming our world?" But the humans seemed to have no interest in conquest. They were focused only on saving lives. Huge cargo ships landed with supplies. Water tanks, shelters, and machines that dug into the ground to pull out clean air and minerals. The humans moved like ants, but each one seemed to know exactly what to do. Even their commanders worked beside engineers carrying crates, giving orders, sweating under the red sun. Rylith stayed close to them, trying to understand how they worked. He noticed something that surprised him. They never looked tired, even when their faces were dirty and their eyes were red. They laughed as they worked, even when everything around them was burning. The Archon had always believed that calmness showed strength, but the humans were loud, emotional, and fierce. Yet their chaos was full of purpose. Every shout, every argument, every rush of movement led to progress. Within days, the humans built an entire temporary city. Tents for the injured, storage zones for food, and hangars for their machines. Their ships stayed in the sky, circling like silent guardians. Some Archon scientists went to meet them, curious about their technology. When they entered a human command tent, they were stunned. Dozens of screens showed data about the planet's temperature, magnetic fields, and volcanic movements. The humans were studying the planet as if it were a living creature they wanted to heal. But not all ships carried builders and medics. Some were bombers, massive machines armed with heavy payloads. When the Archon saw them descending, panic broke out again.
"They are preparing to destroy what's left,"
the people cried. Even Rylith felt fear as the sky filled with dark wings. But when the first explosions came, they were not aimed at cities or shelters. Instead, the bombers targeted faraway fault lines and volcanoes. The blasts echoed across the horizon, shaking the earth. But when the smoke cleared, the volcanic pressure had lessened. The bombers were not here for war. They were part of the rescue. The humans used their bombs like surgeons use tools. They detonated deep in the crust to release pressure and stabilize the planet's surface. To the Archon, it looked like madness using fire to fight fire, but it worked. Within a few days, the tremors that had destroyed buildings stopped. The humans explained through translators, "We're buying you time. The planet is angry, but we can calm it." Rylith spent time with one of the engineers, a tall man named Marcus Hale. Marcus was always covered in soot, his clothes torn, his face blackened with dust. Yet his smile never faded. One night, while repairing a generator, Rylith asked him, "Why do you risk your lives for us? You don't even know us." Marcus shrugged. "Because once we needed help too. Nobody came. We decided we'd never let that happen to anyone else." Those words stayed with Rylith. He realized that the humans were not acting out of pride or gain. They were acting out of memory, of pain they had once lived through. They had turned their suffering into strength, their fear into compassion. Meanwhile, the human commanders worked without rest. Commander Alyssa Ward led from the front, sleeping only a few hours a day. She coordinated the rescue teams, the bombers, and the builders with precision. The Archon Council tried to thank her formally, but she waved it off. "Save your gratitude for later," she said. "We still have a lot to do." When the Council offered her rare Archon crystals as a gift, she refused them. "We're not here for payment. We're here to keep you alive." As the days turned into weeks, the humans began to teach the Archon how to operate their equipment. They didn't keep secrets. They trained them to run generators, filter systems, and med bays. They even built schools for the children, where human teachers and Archon scholars worked side by side. For the first time in generations, laughter returned to the ruined cities. The sound of children learning new words in the human language became a symbol of survival. Still, not everyone trusted them. Some Archon whispered that humans would take over once the crisis ended. "They help now," an elder said. "But what will they demand later?" Commander Ward heard the rumors and called for a public meeting. She stood before thousands of Archon and said simply, "We don't take what's not ours. We build, we protect, and when the job is done, we leave. That's the human way." Her voice was calm, but there was a fire behind her eyes. Even the doubters felt something stir inside them, something between awe and respect. One afternoon, Rylith followed a group of human medics to a collapsed building. Under the rubble, they found survivors trapped for days. The humans used small flying drones to locate them and powerful exosuits to lift the debris. When one Archon child was pulled out, barely breathing, a human doctor pressed her own oxygen mask onto the child's face without hesitation. She fainted moments later from lack of air. That image spread across the camps, a human sacrificing her breath for another species' child. It silenced every doubt left in their hearts. More ships kept arriving. Some carried massive construction robots that rebuilt cities faster than anyone thought possible. The bombers now flew in coordinated patterns, creating controlled detonations that redirected lava away from settlements. From orbit, satellites formed an artificial shield to block radiation storms. The humans were not just rescuing, they were rebuilding. Rylith saw something new in his people's eyes. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with wonder. For so long, the Archon had believed themselves the most advanced and cultured beings in this part of the galaxy. Yet here were these humans, rough, emotional, and unrefined, doing what no empire had dared to do, risking everything for someone else's survival. At night, when the fiery winds calmed, the humans and Archon sat together around power lamps sharing stories. The humans spoke of their homeworld, Earth, a planet of storms, oceans, and endless challenges. They told stories of wars and disasters they had survived. One of them laughed and said, "You'd be surprised what we can live through. We're not smart because we're peaceful. We're smart because we had to fight everything that tried to kill us." The Archon listened, amazed. They realized that the human strength came not from weapons or machines, but from their spirit. As time passed, the once dead plains of Arkala began to show signs of recovery. The skies were still red, but the air was cleaner. The heat was still there, but water flowed again in some regions. The humans had brought more than technology. They had brought willpower. They taught the Archon how to keep fighting, how to keep building even when everything seemed lost. Rylith often stood near the human camp at night, looking at the stars. He thought about the day he sent that desperate message into the void, not knowing if anyone would ever hear it. And now above him, hundreds of human ships floated in orbit, shining like new stars, each one proof that someone had heard. And that help had come in a way he could never have imagined. The humans had answered not with promises, not with speeches, but with action. They came as commanders, builders, and even bombers, not to destroy but to save. The Archon finally understood that humanity's strength was not only in their machines but in their hearts. They were the kind of species that, when asked for shelter, built an army of hope instead, and as the humans continued to rebuild the dying planet, the Archon began to see them not as strangers, but as something far more important, friends from a world that refused to let another world die. The humans had been on Arkala for several months now. Their cities of steel and light had spread across the planet's dying surface, and for the first time in many years, the Archon people were breathing air that did not burn their lungs. But what surprised them most was not the technology or the power of the human ships. It was how the humans worked. They did everything fast. They didn't wait for perfect plans or council meetings. They acted, fixed, and improved as they went. For the Archon, who were used to long discussions and perfect designs, this was both confusing and fascinating. Rylith watched them closely. Every day he saw human commanders giving orders, engineers running through dust storms, and pilots landing supplies with precision. But what truly amazed him was how humans mixed chaos with care. One moment they were shouting orders and arguing. The next, they were laughing, sharing food, or helping a stranger up from the ground. They were unpredictable, emotional, and full of energy that seemed endless. When the Archon worked, they moved like quiet machines, graceful and slow. When humans worked, it was like watching a storm build something beautiful out of destruction. The human commander, Alyssa Ward, had become a figure of respect among the Archon. She was not like their leaders, who wore golden robes and gave long speeches. She wore a worn-out suit, always dirty from work. She carried no crown, no ornaments, and yet when she spoke, everyone listened. She walked among her people and the Archon as if no difference existed. If a generator failed, she fixed it. If a worker was injured, she carried them herself to the medical unit. Her strength came not from authority, but from example. One morning, Rylith saw her standing on a hill looking over the growing refugee camp. The sky was dark, filled with ash clouds. He approached her and said, "Your people do not rest. You build day and night. Are you not afraid this planet will kill you too?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe it will," she said. "But that's the thing about humans. We don't wait for perfect safety before doing what's right." Rylith didn't fully understand her words then, but he could feel the power behind them. As the humans continued to expand their rescue efforts, they began rebuilding communication towers, roads, and water systems. They brought order to chaos. Archon scientists joined them, learning how to use human machines. The humans did not hide knowledge or keep secrets. They shared everything. How their reactors worked, how their bombers were used to control volcanic pressure, how their drones could map underground structures. The Arkan were shocked. No other species shared technology so freely. Most civilizations protected their inventions like treasures. But the humans only said, if it helps save lives, then everyone should know it. The Council of Elders, who had once doubted the humans, now began to see them differently. They invited Commander Ward to the Great Hall of Lisan, the last surviving crystal structure of the old world. The hall was cracked and dim, its once shining walls covered in dust. But the humans helped light it up with portable lamps. When Ward entered, the council stood to greet her, not as a guest, but as an equal. An elder named Theron spoke, his voice old and weary. Commander Ward, your people have done what none of our allies dared. You have saved more lives in months than we could in years. Why? She paused for a moment before answering. Because someone has to, she said softly. Because we've seen what happens when no one comes. She looked around at the broken walls. My world, Earth, was once like this. We nearly destroyed ourselves, but we learned to rebuild. We learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to help others survive too. Her words spread through the Arkan colonies like fire through dry grass. People began repeating them, because someone has to. It became a new kind of prayer, a promise that they would never again turn away from those in need. Still, there were moments of fear and confusion. The humans were not perfect. They argued among themselves, sometimes loudly. Some disagreed on how much they should risk to save the planet. Others wanted to evacuate faster, fearing that staying longer would kill them all. The Arkan watched these debates with wide eyes. How can they fight each other and still work together? Relith wondered aloud one evening. Marcus Hale, the engineer he often spoke with, laughed. That's how we function. We fight, we argue, we yell, but in the end we get the job done. It's the human way, it was true. Even when they disagreed, they never stopped helping. They built faster, repaired quicker, and pushed harder than ever before. Some Arkan started calling them the Builders of Chaos. The name spread through the camps and even reached the humans, who laughed when they heard it. I'll take that as a compliment, Marcus said with a grin. The humans' presence began to change the Arkan themselves. The younger generation, who had grown up in darkness and fear, began to adopt human ways. They learned to take risks, to act without waiting for endless permission. They joined the humans in construction, flying drones and delivering supplies. Rylith noticed how their movements became quicker, their eyes brighter. Hope had made them stronger, but humanity had made them brave. One evening, a great sandstorm swept through the valley. The shelters began to shake, and one of the energy domes protecting a section of the camp started to collapse. Without hesitation, human and Arkan teams ran into the storm together to fix it. The wind howled so loud that voices were drowned out, but still they worked side by side. Commander Ward was there too, pulling cables, shouting directions through her helmet. When the storm finally ended, the dome was standing strong again. No one could tell who had worked harder, the humans or the Arkan. For the first time, they were not two races. They were one force against destruction. After the storm, Ward stood before the gathered survivors and said, "You see what we can do when we stop waiting for permission from fear? That's humanity. That's strength. And now it's yours too." Her words touched everyone, but especially Rylith. He felt something inside him change. For so long, his people had believed that calmness and logic were the only paths to wisdom, but now he saw another kind of wisdom. The wisdom of passion, of courage, of refusing to give up even when everything seemed lost. As the rebuilding continued, the humans began to prepare for the next phase of their mission. Their scientists had discovered that the planet's core instability was worse than they thought. If left alone, Arkala would explode within a few months. The humans didn't hide the truth. They called a public assembly where Commander Ward explained everything. "Your world cannot be saved," she said, her voice firm but kind. "But you can. We will build ships, stations, and habitats. We'll take you off this world. You have our word." The announcement brought both sadness and hope. The Arkan wept for their dying world, but they trusted the humans completely. They knew that if anyone could move mountains, it was these strange, unstoppable beings from Earth. From that day, the work doubled. Humans and Arkan built together, launch pads, orbital lifts, transport docks. Even the bombers were used to carve massive tunnels for evacuation routes. The sky, once filled with fire and smoke, now glowed with the light of engines and progress. Rylith often spent nights looking up at the human fleet orbiting above. He thought about the message he had sent months ago, a desperate call for help. He could never have imagined that the answer would come in the form of these fierce, unpredictable saviors. The humans were not angels. They were flawed, loud, and reckless, but they were also brave, kind, and unstoppable. One night, as he walked near the human command base, he heard Marcus and Commander Ward talking. Marcus said, "We're spending everything we've got on this. Fuel, supplies, even lives. You sure it's worth it?" Ward replied quietly, "If they live, it's worth everything." That single sentence told Rylith all he needed to know about humanity. They didn't save others because it was easy. They did it because it was right. They didn't help because it made them powerful, but because they knew what it meant to be powerless. The Archon finally understood. The human strength wasn't just in their machines or armies. It was in their hearts, their refusal to watch others suffer, their madness for life itself. And as the evacuation preparations began, Rylith whispered a quiet promise to himself and to his people. "We will never forget what the humans taught us. Not just how to survive, but how to live." The Archon had begun to believe that the humans could fix anything, that no disaster was too great, no storm too fierce. But nature had one last test to throw at them. Deep beneath Arkala's cracked surface, the planet's core was roiling violently. Tremors shook the land with the force of mountains moving. Volcanoes erupted without warning, sending rivers of molten rock across the plains. Toxic clouds billowed into the atmosphere, poisoning the few remaining safe zones. The shelters humans and Archon had built were tested beyond their limits. Rylith watched in horror as the ground split in the city's outskirts. Buildings toppled like dominoes, sending dust and ash into the air. People ran in panic, calling for help. For the first time, even the humans looked tense. Commander Alyssa Ward stood on a ridge, scanning the horizon. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with focus. "We've trained for this," she said to Marcus Hale, the engineer at her side. "But it's worse than any simulation. We have to act fast." The human teams moved instantly. Pilots launched bombers toward the erupting volcanoes. But these were no ordinary attacks. They carried carefully calculated fusion charges meant to relieve pressure and redirect molten rivers. Engineers ran alongside massive machines, reinforcing weak structures and stabilizing underground tunnels. Rylith could barely follow their movements. The chaos was overwhelming. Explosions, shaking ground, flying debris. Yet in the middle of this, humans moved with purpose. Every command shouted, every hand lifted, every bolt tightened was part of a larger plan. The Archon were terrified. Elder Theron grabbed Rylith's arm. "They cannot survive this," he whispered. "No one could survive this. They will die like ants under a foot." Rylith shook his head, staring at the humans below. Despite the fury of the planet, they did not hesitate. "They're not ants," he replied. "They're humans." Children were evacuated first, carried in shuttle pods while the ground cracked beneath them. Medical teams ran through burning debris to save the injured. The bombers detonated in precise sequences, and giant plumes of lava were diverted away from the shelters. Each human risked everything. Even when a bomb exploded near a collapsed ridge, killing a few engineers instantly, the rest kept moving. Marcus Hale, his suit scorched and torn, shouted directions over the chaos while dragging trapped Archon civilians to safety. For Rylith, watching it was like witnessing a kind of madness fused with genius. The humans seemed to treat death and danger as normal parts of life, obstacles to overcome rather than threats to fear. They worked with fear in their eyes, but without hesitation. Each explosion, each risk taken was calculated. Yet it carried the pulse of life itself, a refusal to stop, a refusal to fail. As the planet continued to rage, communication became vital. Humans set up networks of drones to relay information in real time, mapping tremors, heat flows, and weak points. Rylith, who had once only watched from the sidelines, was now assisting with data translation, helping human engineers understand the Archon environment. Even with advanced technology, the task was perilous. Bridges of rock and metal collapsed unexpectedly, swallowing machinery and endangering human lives. But they adapted instantly, improvising, rerouting power, shifting resources. At night, the skies glowed with fire. Smoke and ash blotted out the stars. It was impossible to tell which way was safe. Still, humans climbed over rubble, carried wounded through burning streets, and reinforced shelters that shook under every tremor. Rylith followed a small group carrying medical supplies to one of the shelters. They navigated a collapsed street, dodging rivers of molten rock. One human slipped, almost falling into the lava, but another caught him mid-air. There were no complaints, no fear-driven retreat, only survival, determination, and action. As the storm of fire reached its peak, the humans made a bold move. They deployed orbital bombers to trigger controlled detonations in the planet's deep crust. The goal was to relieve the planet's pressure in one massive, coordinated strike. It was a risk like no other. If miscalculated, it could tear the planet apart entirely. Commander Ward stood on the command deck, coordinating hundreds of teams simultaneously, her voice calm but firm. "Focus on timing. Follow the plan. Lives depend on it," Rylith watched from below, heart pounding. The countdown began. Lights flickered as energy surged through the bombs. Moments before detonation, the ground shook violently, sending Rylith sprawling. Then with a roar that split the air, the charges went off. Tremors shook Arcala violently, but instead of destruction, the eruption subsided. Lava flows changed course, fissures stabilized, and air cleared just enough for breathing. The humans had tamed the fury of the planet itself. When the chaos finally subsided, silence fell over the city. Rylith could hear the heavy breathing of exhausted humans and Arkan alike. Smoke rose in the distance, but the shelters stood. The injured were alive, and for the first time, the Arkan realized the scale of what the humans had done. They had faced the planet's wrath head-on and won. In the aftermath, human teams moved quickly to repair minor damage. They worked tirelessly through the night, stabilizing weakened structures and helping Arkan families to safe zones. Rylith saw something he would never forget. Human soldiers carrying Arkan children through the ash, their faces covered in soot, their suits torn and scorched. One little girl clung to a human woman's arm, crying, and the woman whispered soothing words even as her own mask was cracked and smoke-filled. The Arkan had never seen anything like it. They had faced storms, fires, and disasters before, but nothing like this. They had always relied on caution, planning, and diplomacy. The humans had relied on courage, improvisation, and sheer will. And in the end, it had worked. Rylith walked among the survivors, seeing the stunned awe in their faces. Elder Theron approached him, shaking his head. "I thought they would die," he said quietly. "I thought it was the end," Rylith nodded. "So did I," he replied. But they didn't, they never even hesitated. Even Commander Ward did not rest. She coordinated evacuation schedules, made sure supplies reached the farthest shelters, and spoke with every human and Arkan involved. Her calm in the storm was a steady beacon. She treated every life with the same urgency, whether human or Arkan. For the Arkan, it was almost impossible to believe that one being could hold such control amidst such chaos. Over the next few days, the humans repaired infrastructure damaged by the planet's eruptions. Roads were rebuilt, shelters reinforced, and communication lines restored. They taught Arkan survivors how to operate emergency systems themselves, passing knowledge quickly and efficiently. They trained the young to operate drones, manage energy systems, and even navigate supply routes safely. The survivors began to see humans not as strange, unpredictable saviors, but as heroes in the truest sense. Every action taken had been a choice to risk life for others. Every command given, every explosion timed, every rescue made, it was all for the Arkan. Rylith found himself inspired, realizing that bravery did not come from strength alone, but from a willingness to act when everything seemed hopeless. One evening, after another day of tireless work, Rylith saw the human teams gathering around a makeshift campfire. They were dirty, tired, and bruised, yet they laughed and shared stories of past missions and homeworlds. Marcus Hale turned to Rylith and said, "This is how we survive. Not by staying safe, but by staying human, and by saving others when we can." It was a lesson the Arkan would never forget. They realized that survival was more than living. It was courage, compassion, and the refusal to surrender. Through the humans, they learned that even in the face of total destruction, there was a way to fight back and protect life. By the time the storms finally calmed and Arcala's core stabilized temporarily, the Arkan were changed. They had watched the humans confront death itself and win. They had seen them act with a mix of reckless bravery and meticulous planning, risking everything for strangers. And in doing so, the humans had not only saved lives, they had inspired a people to believe in hope, courage, and the impossible. For Rylith, the memory of those days stayed forever. The sound of explosions controlled with precision, the human laughter in the midst of chaos, the children carried safely through fire and ash. It was a story of courage unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And in that chaos, the Archon realized that humanity was not just a species, they were a force. A storm of determination that refused to bow even to the wrath of a dying world. In the aftermath, as humans helped stabilize the final shelters and prepare for evacuation, Rylith understood the true power of the beings who had answered their call. They had come as strangers, as outsiders, yet they had faced a planet's fury without hesitation. Commanders, builders, bombers, they were all part of the same unstoppable force. Humans willing to risk everything to save lives that were not their own. And that knowledge, more than anything else, would guide the Archon into the uncertain future that awaited them beyond Arkala. The skies over Arkala were calmer now, though the scars of the planet's fury remained visible. Mountains had crumbled, valleys had been scorched, and the air still carried a faint smell of ash. But for the Archon people, hope had returned. They had survived the unthinkable thanks to the humans who had come from a distant world, answering a desperate plea. Every building the humans had constructed, every bomb carefully detonated to stabilize the planet, every life saved, had reminded the Archon that they were not alone in the galaxy. The humans, however, did not stop. Even after the immediate danger passed, they worked tirelessly to prepare for the next stage, evacuating the survivors and ensuring the long-term survival of the Archon people. Giant transport shuttles were loaded with supplies, water, food, and medicine. Refugees were trained to navigate the shuttles and even help with piloting smaller crafts. The Archon children, who had once feared for their lives, now played near the landing pads, learning to operate simple human devices with excitement and curiosity. Commander Alyssa Ward coordinated the evacuation personally. She moved from shuttle to shuttle, checking systems, speaking to engineers, and encouraging the humans and Archon alike. Her calm demeanor inspired confidence. Even in the midst of exhaustion, she was tireless. Rylith observed her and realized something profound. Humanity's strength was not only in their technology or courage, but in their ability to inspire others to act and survive. The Archon elders, who had once doubted the humans, now spoke of them with reverence. Elder Theron, who had feared that the humans might fail or even harm them, now approached Rylith quietly. "I see now," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "that they are unlike any being I have ever known. They act not for power, not for gain, but for life itself." Rylith nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The humans had risked everything for the Archon, not for glory or reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As evacuation preparations continued, the humans began teaching the Archon how to survive in the ships, in space, and on a new planet that would become their refuge. They explained life support systems, emergency procedures, and even basic engineering principles so that the Archon could maintain the equipment themselves. Marcus Hale led many of these training sessions, his patience remarkable even when young Archon students struggled to understand the alien machinery. "You'll get it," he said with a smile, wiping soot from his hands. "It's not magic. It's just science. And you've got the brains for it." The children were the fastest learners. Their curiosity and fearlessness reminded the humans of themselves when they had been young, exploring dangerous worlds and surviving situations far beyond their years. One evening, Rylith watched a group of children operating drones under the supervision of human pilots. They flew the machines with precision, avoiding obstacles and delivering supplies to shelters still scattered across the fractured landscape. The humans cheered when they succeeded, and even the elders smiled, seeing a new generation of Archon prepared for survival. Despite the heavy workload, the humans found moments of levity. They told stories around campfires, shared food, and even taught games to the children. Rylith joined in one night, listening as Marcus recounted tales of Earth, storms that swallowed entire cities, mountains that erupted, oceans that flooded towns. "We've survived worse than this," he said, pointing at the devastated landscape. "You will too. That's what it means to be alive." The Archon laughed nervously, realizing that they had never known life could be so dangerous, and yet so full of courage. The time came for the first wave of evacuation. Massive shuttles, piloted by human and Archon teams together, lifted off from the scorched plains carrying the most vulnerable survivors. The humans had designed the shuttles to be fast, safe, and efficient. Rylith watched as children waved to him, some clutching small pets or treasured belongings, others holding hands with the humans who had saved them. It was a sight that brought tears to his eyes. Life carried forward even from a dying world. Not everything went smoothly. During one launch, a sudden tremor caused a shuttle to tilt dangerously. Panic spread among the Arkan passengers. But the human pilot, voice calm over the comms, guided the shuttle with precision, stabilizing it just in time. The passengers cheered when they landed safely on the temporary orbital station. Rylith realized that for humans, facing danger was never about fear. It was about action. And their confidence inspired the Arkan to trust them completely. Meanwhile, human engineers continued to improve the evacuation systems. Conveyor belts moved supplies, automated drones carried water and food to the shuttles, and repair teams worked around the clock to fix the broken infrastructure. Rylith noticed that the humans never complained. They worked through hunger, fatigue, and injury, yet kept smiling and encouraging each other. Their laughter in the midst of chaos was infectious. The Arkan began to see that survival was not just about shelter or technology, it was about spirit. One day, Rylith walked beside Commander Ward as she inspected the newly completed orbital habitat. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "How do you keep going when everything around you is falling apart?" She looked at him with tired but unwavering eyes. "We don't stop," she said simply. "We don't give up on life. That's all. And when you see others depending on you, that makes it even stronger." Rylith understood then that the humans' resilience was not just physical, but moral. They acted because they believed in something larger than themselves. As the evacuation continued, the Arkan began to rebuild their sense of community. They organized themselves into teams, working alongside humans to clear debris, repair buildings, and guide others to safety. They learned how to operate communication arrays, build temporary shelters, and even assist with medical care. For the first time, the Arkan were active participants in their survival rather than passive observers. The humans had not only saved them, they had empowered them. When the last wave of survivors lifted off from the planet, the humans stayed behind to finish stabilizing Arkala. They had created a system of temporary shields, automated drones, and reinforced structures that would allow the planet to remain safe long enough for scientific teams to study it further. Their work was meticulous, planned, and yet carried the same human energy, unpredictable, passionate, relentless. Finally, after weeks of effort, the Arkan looked down from the orbital station at their homeworld. It was scarred, broken, and still dangerous, but life remained. Oceans shimmered faintly in the sunlight, smoke rose from distant valleys, and the wind carried a faint scent of renewal. The Arkan realized that they had not only survived, they had been given a second chance. Rylith walked through the orbital station, seeing families settling into their new homes. Children laughed, elders shared stories of the old world, and humans continued to teach, guide, and support. It was a new beginning, made possible by the courage and determination of a species that had come from light years away, answering a desperate plea. In the months that followed, the Arkan named their new capital Terra's Promise in honor of the humans who had saved them. The city was built using a combination of Arkan knowledge and human technology. Crystal towers now stood alongside metal domes, shimmering in the artificial sunlight provided by human engineers. Streets were alive with people, laughter, and hope, the first true signs of civilization after the catastrophe. Rylith often reflected on the journey. He remembered the fear, the panic, and the chaos of the dying world. He remembered the humans' commanders, builders, and bombers who risked everything without hesitation. He remembered the lessons learned, that courage is more powerful than fear, that action is more valuable than waiting, and that compassion can survive even in the harshest conditions. The humans, though eventually returning to their own world, left behind not just technology but a legacy. They had taught the Arkan how to face disaster with strength, how to protect life even in the face of impossible odds, and how to rebuild not just their planet, but their spirit. For the Arkan, humanity had become more than saviors. They had become teachers, heroes, and friends. As Rylith looked out at the stars, he felt a deep gratitude. The Arkan had been given a second chance, not by chance or luck, but by beings who refused to turn away from a cry for help. He realized that this was the true power of humanity, the willingness to act, the courage to face impossible odds, and the compassion to save lives that were not their own. And in that quiet moment, watching the stars and the distant scarred surface of Arkala, Rylith knew that the story of the Arkan people was not ending. It was just beginning. Because humanity had come, answered their call, and left behind a promise that would shape their civilization forever. The Archon would never forget the commanders who led them, the builders who saved them, and the bombers who tamed the fury of their dying world. And they would carry that memory into the future, a reminder of courage, hope, and the unstoppable spirit of a species that truly understood what it meant to save others.